what are the top 10 books that prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that the global elite do have a continuity of agenda, a plan for at least 100 years or more, going back to the people in the 1920s and 30s at the Royal Society and so forth. Well, I'm going to tell you today the top 10 books, give you a little summary of those texts and where you can find the full-on lectures to the entirety of those books. They're in no specific order because, of course, they're all really important. But one thing I would say is that before we get to the top 10, there's an honorable mention that I would have to give to Plato's Republic. If you don't know, Plato's Republic really describes the ideal form of government that would lead to technocracy, or the idea that techne, that we could have a purely rational, purely machine-like form of government for human society. And while this might sound plausible, it really doesn't match with human nature. If human nature, for example, has free will, then you can't perfectly quantify or have a purely rational system for how to run human societies. So the idea that you could squish everything into an ideal form, a mathematical form, is itself kind of a fool's errand. And that's why historically a lot of regimes, a lot of communist Marxist regimes, for example, who sought to implement a Platonic style republic, and Plato's Republic really has the proto versions of communism where the middle class or the guardian class shares everything in a kind of communal form. That would influence a lot of today's modern technocrats who kind of want to implement something like that, but on the basis of a international currency, international electronic currency, I should say, some form of international government and some form of international religion. So let's look at some of the key texts that show this beyond any shadow of a doubt. As you know, when I see from the elite themselves, what do they say their plans are? Do they have open texts, open source material? And that's always what we work for. I have an entire shelf over there on the opposite wall, just as large as these shelves from ceiling to floor, that are nothing but the writings of the global elite themselves. And so I picked out of the 60 or so that we've lectured through, the top 10 that I think are the most illustrative, the clearest to make this point. Jacques Attalier's book, Brief History of the Future. This was written in 2006 and really describes a technocratic, supposedly a utopia based around transhumanism. This is his own terminology that he uses. He says that nanotech and such will lead us to having an interlinked global mind. He calls this global mind a form of the golem from medieval lore. He says that transhumanists are the vanguard of the New World Order, and through the organization of society into an international order, the future will be such that an AI centralized technocratic government using a kind of Borg hive mind model will be able to create the perfect kind of global government in the year 2040 to 2050. So here you have the Kissinger of France literally telling us that that is indeed what is planned. And again, you can see this again modeled coming out of Plato's ideal form of government that he outlines in the Republic. Even though it's not identical to the ancient Greek philosophical system, it is definitely influenced by that. Another one is the book that is approved by the Rand Corporation, and it's Alex Abea's book, Soldiers of Reason. And he was granted an inside access to write an official history of the Rand Corporation about the rise of the American empire and the rise of the technocratic ideas that underlie the Rand Corporation in the entirety of basically the second half of the 20th century, and how they were the masters of the Cold War. They were the masters of transitioning America away from a industry-based society to a servant-based society, basically. They really engineered the whole idea of Cold War, mutual assured destruction, all of the fear, all the panic, which transitioned to the war on terror, which is also something that comes out of the Rand Corporation. Socialized medicine and international technocratic order, all of those things are pioneered by people like Rand Corporation. And a lot of the other programs that we've covered, like the Phoenix program and MKUltra, also had key connects to the Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation is also the pioneers of the idea of the rational choice theory or game theory, by which ultimately everything could be manipulated on the basis of personal desire. So it comes out of the whole ethos of kind of the atomistic individualism of someone like Adam Smith come to its full transmutation, I guess you could say, into a kind of a technocratic, socialized, great society. They pioneered the ideas of mass welfare and so forth, all under a corporate Fortune 100 style consulted order. So it actually mentions the many instances and cases where the Fortune 100 were consulting with entities like RAND to help establish the world order that we now have. And this corporate world order is not anything like what it's sold as. It's the opposite of what it's sold and what it markets itself as. So it markets itself as pandering to ease, innovation, freedom, rights, and yet none of those things are actually at the core of what it's about. It's actually about Malthusianism, it's about technocracy, and it's about control. Another important text that is often overlooked is the official biography of the Rockefellers by Collier and Horowitz. And this is such an amazing, fascinating text that goes into the history of the creation of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, CFR created back in 1921, the role of J.P. Morgan, Woodrow Wilson, and others in being influenced by the American dynasty known as the Rockefellers. Gets into the history of things like the CIA, foreign operations, and how David Rockefeller had a huge role in a lot of those calling the shots, basically, right? The shot caller in all those operations. And that really it amounts to a banker style or a corporate style global government interested in mass depop. And there's very relevant chapters on the history and rise of feminism as something supported by Abby Rockefeller. There's relevant chapters on the creation of the ecumenist movement as a model for a global religion. Ultimately, that would all be serving as a tool for this international single technocratic order. And again, we have all of the same players popping up in all these texts. So it's not like we have to wonder who's involved or where the puzzle pieces are moving, the chess pieces. They're all listed very clearly in these texts. Next up would be the very important classic book that is probably probably if I had to pick one most important text out of all these, it would be Dr. Carroll Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, which it's about 1,300 pages. And as you know, we lectured through the entirety of this book about 5 years ago, and it's proven to be one of the more popular things that we've done. That really kicked off the entire Lectures on the Global Elite series. And if you haven't watched that series, I recommend going and watching it, because it's really just an entire history from the perspective of the Anglo-American establishment or the Atlanticist elite power structure, on how they were in many ways involved in the two world wars of the 20th century, and that the plan of those world wars was to actually nullify and drain the two potential rivals to the Atlanticist power bloc, that is the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia. And that was the real meaning of the two world wars and the Cold War, which led us up to this idea of a synthesis towards a new world order, which is based around the ideas of the third way, or the idea of the synthesis between the dialectical oppositions of the Cold War, monopolistic capitalism, and Soviet bloc communism meeting in the middle to produce what nowadays is called the Great Reset. And all of that was described in that manual from the establishment back in the 1960s, clear as day, detailing, like no other book, the real power structure in the West. Now, Dr. Quigley, who, by the way, was Bill Clinton's mentor, how dare you read Dr. Quigley's books? How dare you? Now, there's another book that Quigley wrote that's just as important and arguably a little more accessible and readable, and that's his book, Anglo-American Establishment, which goes into the history of the roundtable groups, the Royal Society, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House, Pratt House, and the history of those steering committee groups, roundtable groups, which would form the basis of this inner group of the Western elite that basically are setting up what we call the international order or the technocratic order. it goes into how they did this, in what ways they were sort of behind the British Empire, and how when the British Empire kind of crumbled, they used their agents to infiltrate and turn the United States into the next stage of this imperium. That is, the Pax Britannia gives way to the Pax Americana, which then gives way to the international order, which is what's coming into fruition now. So you can see very clearly from these texts written back in the 1960s, from the vantage point of the establishment, because of course Quigley was the archivist for the Council on Foreign Relations, and so he was looking at their inner text, their history, their archives, to see what the plan actually was. Equally as important as Dr. Quigley's writings are another one of the key thinkers for the internationalist, and that is Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, where he predicts the coming of the technocratic age, America's role in the technocratic era. And Brzezinski's book was written back in the early 1970s and got into a lot of things that still to this day seem to be, quote, sci-fi, right? He predicted genetic modification and mutation on a mass level, nanotech. He predicts Skynet-style surveillance and control systems. He talks about the rise of ecumenism and a kind of global religion. He talks about the GEO engineering things that could be done. He talks about how ultimately the technocratic era is the future that will come about on the basis of the emerging power out of the Cold War. So for Brzezinski, as a major Cold War player, a major actor in the Cold War, especially in the situation with the Soviets in Afghanistan, Brzezinski really wanted to see the order become international in a real powerful way that wasn't primarily American. So he's not really an Americanist. He's more of a globalist in the sense of he foresaw and wanted a power structure that would be transnational, that didn't have anything to do with America or Russia or any of these things. It was something supranational that would be an international group running things that running the style of government which he explicitly identifies as a technocracy, and showing the continuity of agenda between him and today's elites, such as Klaus Schwab, who we've covered for the last several years. We were doing videos on Davos 5-6 years ago pointing this out. And now we have, of course, Klaus's fairly recent book from 2018, Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where he explicitly tells us that yes, it will be an international global order. Yes, it will be based around centralized AI tech. Yes, it will be based around Skynet. Yes, it will be based around the idea of nanotech inside of you, the rewriting of human RNA, DNA, and so forth, all listed clear as day in Klaus's text, specifically in the last third of that book. He even hints at it being a quasi-religious thing, where he talks about a new religion, a new covenant, a new narrative, right, is one of Klaus's other books for the global order that is now emerging, and he identifies it as his Great Reset. Another one of the key texts that is overlooked is, this is about number 9 here, is Shaping of the, UNESCO, Its Purpose and Philosophy, Julian Huxley's famous text, setting the stage of the mindset, the philosophy of UNESCO. What is UNESCO? Well, it's the United Nations Education and Social Development Organ, or arm, which is tasked with really creating the culture that the UN wants as one of the key organs of global power for the internationalists. And the amazing thing about this book is that it's really honest in its descriptions of the future being a genetic-based, tiered structure society. So all the talk that we've heard over the years of equality and equalitarianism is actually undermined and shown to be something that they never had in mind when we look at this 1946 text, which describes basically an international technocratic order based around biometrics. And so they just took eugenics and renamed it as biometrics to make it sound more plausible, more humanitarian. But it's the exact same idea of Malthusianism that all the other global elite texts share. And so again, this is the official philosophy of the system. And none of these philosophies are pro-human. They're all antinatalism. They are all premised on the idea that humanity in mass has to be reduced in number and ultimately supplanted by technology or overtaken by or controlled or run by centralized technocratic systems. Next up is the 2000. Actually, I want to do another one of the old ones that's in the same era. And I'm going to kind of class these as two books together because it's the same power structure and it's the same people from their same circles, right? In 1928, you have H.G. Wells writing The Open Conspiracy. And then a few years later, 1940, he reflects on that. So both of these books kind of go together. And that's The Open Conspiracy and The New World Order by H.G. Wells, and he was the liberal side of this international order, who was portraying himself as a man of the people and all this kind of. But he was very much anti-human because he thought that, again, depop was something absolutely necessary. He thought that the family is an oppressive structure that we need to get rid of. And so both of those books, again, from the same, these are all people from the same power structure writing all of the same things in their texts. So it should be really obvious, really easy, very simple to go and verify and see, are these things the case? Were these the people that were in power in the 1920s and 30s? Were they shaping the world at the time? Are they still shaping the world today? And do they call for all of the same technocratic international plans? Well, absolutely they do. It's in all of their books. Another one of these that is very important that I would include in the top 10, I think we've done 9 now or 10, and then maybe one extra bonus would be the 2000 era essay written by Bill Joy from Sun Microsystems, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. And this is still up publicly at Wired Magazine. If you print it out, it's about a 15, 20 page essay that really kind of goes over a lot of material that's very similar to what's in Quigley's text, actually. He doesn't mention Quigley, but he does mention a lot of other philosophers, a lot of other geopolitical writers that you've heard me mention. And Bill Joyce says that, the unfortunate thing that he realized when he was at some of these meetings with a lot of the Silicon Valley tech elite was that they had adopted a full-on Malthusian plan, a full-on plan to, rid the planet of a large portion of people. And that the way to this end game would be what we would see in the text of Klaus, or the Great Reset style dystopian world. The Brave New World scenario is really what he outlines, and he says this within the first 5 pages of the essay. So there you have it. That's just 10 amongst many, many more.